Well, it finally happened. I spilled most of a glass of water across my keyboard, my nice keyboard, a couple of days ago.
What are we talking about? Like 4 fluid ounces or like 12 fluid ounces?
Here's the offending glass.
Wow, that's a big
in my
old cup.
hand. I'd say, in fact, the amount of water in this glass as we speak is maybe a little less than this. It was maybe
so
about
I'm
half.
guessing like 7 fluid ounces probably there.
I would say at least. There was a large puddle on the desk.
Ooh.
And the keyboard, I think, is the only electronic device that really got the brunt of it.
Yeah. Did it go inside the keyboard or did it just go around the keyboard?
It's a nice keyboard. It definitely went across the top of the keyboard. I can't say if it went inside though, because it's one of the newer, like, nice Apple Magic. I think they call it Magic keyboard now. It's the Bluetooth, the full size Bluetooth aluminum.
You know how you let the magic out, right?
How is
you pour water on it?
Oh, that's no. I didn't want
Does it still work?
All the keys. So I immediately set about letting it dry for, let's say, 30 minutes. I probably should not have turned it back on as fast as I did. But
that's a little less time than I would have gone with, probably.
I had work to do.
Do you not have a spare keyboard?
Yes, I do. I should have gotten one out.
Okay.
I quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked fine. I've tested every key on here. They all work.
Is it a membrane one or is it one of the butterfly key ones?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure how to tell the difference. But the thing I was going to say, though, is, like I said, all the keys work. It feels really mushy now.
Oh,
is this confirmation bias that I think something is wrong with it? So I'm sensing something that's not there because, like, the action on the keys feels a lot mushier and less responsive than it did. Is that possible?
I think you're paying attention. So, okay, if there was water between the membrane and the keyboard,
it just wouldn't work.
You would not feel mushiness. It would just not work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not worried about that. I'm just wondering if something like in the membrane got wet and expanded or something. Is that possible? It's probably rubber though, right? Or
nope, you're good. That's not going to happen. I don't think there's nothing in there. The way those switches work, it's just springy plastic usually.
Really?
Yeah, because the switch, the part of the thing that makes the key go up and down has nothing to do with the mechanism other than there's a contact that it closes on the board when it's closed.
Right. So the action comes entirely from the membrane.
You might be fine. Like that kind of keyboard, you can kind of pour water on and like as long as it doesn't short anything out or rust, you're fine.
Can I just like type into our show notes document right now and tell you what I feel? Because my fingers are saying something different than what you're telling.
I mean, look, maybe it's time for you to finally get on that mechanical train.
I probably should. It's really useful to have a keyboard that doesn't make any sound at all when you are talking into a microphone.
I mean, okay, then get one of those laser ones that prints the laser on your desk in front of you and just learn to use that.
Now we're talking. Now we're going full Star Trek. Okay, first of all, I don't actually need to replace this keyboard. It seems to still work.
It's going to still work right up until the moment that it doesn't. That's how this usually goes.
As much as my fingers are telling me something is off, I'm typing lazy dog. This is wrong.
Yeah.
I've been thinking for a while about one of those Microsoft Surface keyboards. Have you ever used one of those?
The pad ones?
Well, what do you mean by pad?
Well, they have multiple kinds. There's one that's a real keyboard with like little switches. And then there's one that's like it's like capacitive with a little bumps that basically move a tiny bit.
This has got actual keys. It looks like one of these. It looks like it's patterned after one of these Apples with the really short, the chiclet keys and the really short throw. But it's got a fingerprint sensor and it works with Windows Hello.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which is kind of the reason I want one.
My face tracker, my eye tracker works with Hello. I would describe it as moderately useful.
Only moderately?
Sometimes it works.
Okay.
Sometimes not so much.
You know what always works?
My 6-digit passcode.
Unless you are some kind of degenerate criminal who has burned off your fingerprints. Your fingerprints.
I mean, I guess that's true. I'm looking at this Surface keyboard now. Price is $1,000.
Whoa, what?
Seems like a lot. Oh, that's with the computer.
That's okay. I don't need a new computer with it necessarily.
I think
$80 at Best Buy. That's like not.
I like being able to feel the keys move.
Look, I get it. Mechanical keyboards feel great. They are just kind of noisy for an open mic.
You can get a quiet mechanical keyboard. I have switches here. As soon as my keyboardio comes, I'm putting them in and I'm ready to go. Actually,
now that you mention it, are there aftermarket like user installable fingerprint sensors that work with mech keyboards now? Like, can you do that on your own?
You can buy a fingerprint sensor that you just tape on your desk.
Yes. Oh, I know you can buy like an external USB one, but look, You know how I feel about
the integration is the appeal for you.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't help you with that.
Well, okay.
Did I ever tell you about the time that I became a hero to our new publisher at Tested, Brad?
No.
We were sitting in the conference room at the Tested office on Brandon Street, the old one upstairs, and she dumped a glass of water over her brand new company issued MacBook Air or MacBook Pro or whatever.
Oh.
And I was like, oh God, turn it off fast. I can fix it. And she was like, wait, what? You can fix this? I was like, yes. So I went and got the pentalobes, turned it off, flipped it over, opened it up, completely dismantled it, dried it, cleaned it with rubbing alcohol, put it all back together, fires right back up. And never was wise. No, IT was never the wiser.
Right there in the conference room.
While we were having a meeting,
just field stripped the MacBook right there.
While we were having a meeting, she was like, how do you know how to do this? I was like, this is what we do here at Tested. She's like, oh man, I get it. Okay.
And the rest was history.
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
I'm not gonna lie. I had a brief moment there. I was like, which order are the names? Is it Brad and Will, or is it Will and Brad? I think it's alphabetical.
Huh. You know what? I thought about that on the show title. It's the other way.
No, it's Brad and Will.
Oh, I know, but I'm saying it's the opposite of how we introduce ourselves.
Oh, that's true.
You're Will. I'm Brad. That's the opposite of.
Yeah, I'm Will.
We've thought our branding through very thoroughly, as you can tell.
There's a Gimlet podcast up. Gimlet is the podcast network that has had Reply All and Startup and all those shows that was started by some ex-NPR folks who then went on to sell to somebody. I can't remember who, Spotify or somebody.
Oh yeah, was it Spotify?
But when they were starting, they did this series about what it was like to start a company. And one of the things that they did was do an episode about branding firms. So they went to a bunch of branding firms and interviewed them until somebody was like, you know, if you want to see what the process is like, we can just do it for your company. Yeah. So they got millions of dollars worth of branding advice as part of a podcast, which is how they came up with the Gimlet Media name, which I think probably wasn't worth it in the end.
No, it's not bad. It's kind of snappy. It sounds fancy. Is that essentially the podcasting version of asking the firm to work for exposure?
I mean,
that's exactly what that is.
It's an interesting episode. It completely changed the way I thought about those kind of branding firms because, like, I've never been in a position to actually work with them. B, I think it was. I don't know. Maybe it was a good name. They came up with a bunch of fake names, like not word names that sound like words. You know, like Inatrode and stuff like that.
I would love to get the brainstorming session on tape for just coming up with non-words.
It was good. Like, that part was super interesting. And they were like, this is where it implies this and this and this, because people hear this and they think this word, but they really, so you basically, the whole idea is that you draft off of another more valuable word.
Sure. Okay.
Anyway,
something that implies without being
speed or excellence or whatever that makes people think that without knowing. But then they went with Gimlet because the guy who was starting the network was like, I like gimlets.
Well,
there
okay,
you go.
Then.
Yeah,
that's kind of how I come up with passwords that I need to remember and be able to produce on command. Not like
how many passwords do you have to produce on command?
I don't mean serious passwords, like anything that is remotely important. I just generate like a strong password.
Yeah,
something that I have to like type in, like console, like on the consoles. Occasionally, you'll have to enter your password on a controller.
Yeah,
to do things. So you kind of need to be able to remember that.
I think they all let you do it from the phone now.
Do they?
I think so. I had to type in a PlayStation password the other day, and it was like, you can go to this website. I think maybe I had to use the app. I can't remember.
Yeah. Anyway, I come up with like phonetic nonsense in my head to yeah.
I go to 1Password and I choose the use 3 words option.
That's probably the actual right answer at this point. Anyway,
gentler evil monopoly.
It's funny how many of those phrases, I mean, this is just more human pattern recognition, right? How many of those phrases seem to have a certain theme to them when they come out?
Yeah. Do you ever feel like some of the random password generator stuff is not actually like, I feel like the Steam code generator, I have to use that kind of a lot because I switch Steam accounts that I'm logged in as on the regular now. I feel like the same numbers come up a lot with that.
That one's alphabetic only, isn't it? I think that one is like only five
letters and numbers, but it's only 5 numbers.
Steam use numeric as well. Okay.
Yeah, Steam uses numeric as well. It just feels like they're very similar. There's patterns in there. Anyway.
It's all just security theater, man. They just want you to think you're safe, man.
In the old office, Valve had a whole bunch of lava lamps with a webcam pointed at them to generate randomness. But now, man, they're just using a random number generator on an old Compact 486. It's not the same, man.
Who actually did that? That was an
RSA thing.
That was Cloudflare. That did or still does the lava lamp wall.
I think the lava lamp wall thing is still a thing, but I don't know for sure.
It appears to be. Anyway. Yeah.
So today we decided to take a trip. Speaking of 486s and lava lamp walls and the video games, we decided to take a trip back in time to September 5th, 1995.
That's right.
Season 13, episode 8 of the Computer Chronicles.
The Computer Chronicles, which might as well be a warm, fuzzy blanket in public television form.
With Stewart Cheifet. Hero of the nerds, I would say.
Was he? I don't know.
He didn't seem like that much of a nerd, really.
No, he's really got like more of kind of mid-90s business dad energy kind of to him. But
he seemed like a dude who was really into word processors in like 1985.
Yes.
I had to guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, we haven't done one of these in over a year now. I think this is only the second one we've done, just kind of recapping a classic Computer Chronicles episode. I feel like the show has been like kind of back in the zeitgeist or the public awareness a little bit lately.
It's funny because like about every 3 months, somebody discovers the one time that I was on Computer Chronicles in 2002 or 2001. And then that chucks me down the Computer Chronicles hole, which is fun.
I assume you would much rather hear from somebody about your Computer Chronicles appearance than your Oscars appearance at this point.
Oh, thank God. Yeah, right? Any day, please. Okay. It's still bad, Brad, just for the record.
Yes, I know. Like I'm tagged on enough of your tweets just to get the runoff. I promise you, I see some of it. So like I've seen somebody's been passing a script around recently that somebody wrote to scrape the entirety of the Computer Chronicles from archive.org is one reason that I know people have been thinking about it. There's also that Twitch channel that I can never remember the name of. It's something along the lines of like Retro Computer Show. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I've not seen that. That sounds cool.
Tiny Computer Show.
Oh, I'll have to follow that.
Oh, dude. You should pull up. Oh, hang on. I'm sorry. I just pulled it up and it's very loud. It's Old Timey Computer Show on Twitch.
With an E?
Yes. Timey with an E.
Okay.
It's a bunch of stuff. It's not just Computer Chronicles. It's a 24/7 curated showcase of videotapes and films on computers and video games from the 20th century is how they describe it. But Computer Chronicles does come up quite a bit on that channel. Well, and I feel like that channel is a little more visible than it used to be.
The thing I will say about Computer Chronicles is it gives you a lovely glimpse in time. Most of the episodes are on archive.org. We will post a link to this in the show notes if you want to watch it before you listen to us, or if you want to watch it. We're going to talk about it a little bit out of order from the way it was aired. So you might want to go take your 28 minutes and watch the show and then come back to the podcast.
It's a nice, I will say Star Trek The Next Generation and the Computer Chronicles are my two, like, I don't do it very often, but every once in a while, like it's just a weekend morning.
Your warm TV blankets.
Yes. I'm just like, I'm going to get a little Stewart Cheifet this morning while I wake up, and it's just pleasant.
So it's funny. The ones that are interesting to me, the ones from the 80s are okay. I think we did one from the 80s last time. The ones from the 80s are okay as a novelty, but I don't have a lot of context from that time.
Yeah, like the last one we did was like at 85, 86, I want to say.
It was early,
And that was years before I had access to computers regularly. And that was like in the territory of like, look at this 40 megabyte hard drive. Can you believe this? And like, yes, that is, even for you who's a little older than me, like that's still pretty absent of any context that we experienced.
Yeah, we got like an IBM XT hand-me-down in probably 1990, maybe 89, seems like. So, but I didn't I knew how to run stuff on it. I didn't know anything about how to make it work, I guess, at that point. Yeah. So, so this episode we're talking about is one of their gaming specials, which they did occasionally. And it has, as you said, some real dad energy.
Yeah. Real quick historical context here. I think you said it already. September 5th, 1995 is the air date I pulled for this.
Yeah, this was about a month after Windows 95 came out.
I was going to say Windows 95 came out on August 24th. So yes, less than a month. Like 3 weeks. 3 weeks. 2 weeks after Windows 95 came out, just to put this in perspective.
So, but so the thing to remember is Windows 95 came out in August. They launched it in like May or April or something with a big event.
Wait, you mean like the whole Rolling Stones thing and everything?
Yeah.
Was it really?
Yeah, I thought that wasn't around the launch. That was to build up hype for the launch.
Wow. In my memory, the whole that extravaganza, the whole gala launch with the song and everything was like all right there in August. No?
Huh. I don't think so.
Weren't they like shipping preview builds of Chicago with magazines, or am I conflating things? Maybe it was there was some kind of like limited Windows 95 demo you could get with a magazine or something. I forget.
I thought that was just video, but I don't remember. I don't know how you would have played video on a computer in 1995, honestly, before Windows 95.
Well, let's ask the Computer Chronicles.
So anyway, this episode is about games. There's a bunch of FMV stuff. There's a bunch of MechWarrior 2. They're showing MechWarrior 2. Mm-hmm. They talk about some online gaming stuff. They talk about the PlayStation and the Saturn for some reason.
Weirdly out of nowhere at the end of this episode or this show about computers, here is the PlayStation and the Saturn. But
I think they wanted to ask Sony and Sega for consoles.
Right. Stewart seemed pretty into it.
Yeah, the kids wanted to play that Panzer Dragoon, man.
Yeah. But do you want to start with Judgment Day though, because that's probably the most eye-opening or weirdly out of left field thing in this episode?
This is the least Computer Chronicles event that I think has ever been featured on the Computer Chronicles, and B also is a notorious event. It's when they kicked off DirectX at it's like the developer kickoff for DirectX at Microsoft.
Yeah,
and it became this is the event that spawned what became Meltdown, which was the DirectX Developers Conference for years.
So I'm not even familiar with Meltdown. Is that also? Googling for Microsoft Meltdown now just gets you a lot of Meltdown Inspector notifications, which probably very different. But when did Meltdown stop?
Meltdown stopped in 2007. It was while I was still at Maximum PC, or 2008. It got rolled into Build.
Okay.
So basically in the old days, there were 3 Microsoft conferences. Well, there were 2 big Microsoft conferences, and then there was Meltdown. And the big Microsoft conferences were WinHEC, which was the hardware integrators conference. And there was a software equivalent. I don't remember what it was called before it was called Build. And then Meltdown was like a bacchanal for game developers where everybody came to Seattle and they all stayed in that Sheraton across from PAX. And people would put slip and slides in the hotel hallways and stuff like that. And it got big. I only went a few times, but it was buck wild.
Oh, wait, you went. Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, they always asked us to come to talk about hardware stuff with and sit in the hardware sessions and stuff like that.
I mean, Bacchanal is exactly the vibe I get from this footage, which again, this was a one-off at this point, right? This was not an annual thing yet, but
it's this is 10 times what any of those Meltdowns were. To be clear, yeah.
Also some of the stuff you've written in here that I'll let you expand on that was not depicted in the footage sounds even weirder, but the whole thing has just got this gothic, kind of slightly cheesy but slightly sinister Halloween costume party motif.
Look, man, in 1995, there were only 2 types of music. There was alternative. Mm-hmm. Well, there were 3 types of music. There was alternative, there was rap, and then there was metal.
Yeah, gangster rap was getting pretty big at this point.
Gangster rap was big, but not at all in this audience did not care about the hip hops. This was a metal crowd full of metal people with John Romero didn't have long hair because he wanted long, luscious hair. It was because he was a metal kid, right?
Right. Yes.
So this was the kickoff of DirectX, which happened about 3 months after the launch of Windows 95.
Yeah, I wonder if they even have the DirectX name at this point, because in the episode they never say that. They only refer to Direct Draw and Direct Play, and it sounds like those are the only 2 components that were actually
that's what launched.
Ready to go at this point.
Yeah, I think Direct Sound came on shortly after that, if I remember right. That might have been in DirectX 2.
We talked about before we started recording, maybe doing a whole kind of history of DirectX episode, which would be fun, I think. But what are the directs? There's draw, play, input, sound.
Well, there's a bazillion now. There's all shader languages, all sorts of other stuff. But so according to this PC Gamer retrospective that they wrote a few years ago, the DirectX name came after because they introduced this stuff at GDC in the spring, and when one of the journalists who was briefed wrote about it, they mocked it as Oh yeah, it's direct this, direct that. They should just call it DirectX or something like that.
What?
And the team at Microsoft liked the name so much that they kept it.
That's amazing.
The I don't want to get too much into the DirectX stuff because it is an infinite well of weird 90s shit and awful behavior and sadness. Because it started as a 3-person team led by this guy named Alex St. John, who was a regular columnist for Boot and then Maximum PC Magazine for quite a while, who also turned out to be a fairly notorious shitheel.
Yeah.
I would describe him as controversial to wildly offensive views about women and minorities and all sorts of stuff, to the point that his daughter wrote an article on Medium that then got picked up by Wired that denounced him for being shitty. So that's definitely not endorsing.
I mean, when your own family members, especially your own children, are coming out against you in public, you've really ascended to a very exclusive plane of shittiness.
Yeah, it's like you're a Arizona House member or Alex St. John, it seems like. So,
yeah. And like, honestly, like saying that, to be fair, I didn't see any footage of like booth babes, like, you know,
I'm sure there
probably were. I didn't see any in this footage, but like the point is, like, hearing you say that about him and seeing what this event looked like, it kind of makes more sense how this turned out this way.
Yeah, they're like, they named it internally the Manhattan Project because he wanted to destroy Japanese console makers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dude.
And it wasn't an accident, just to be clear. He was like, yeah, no, we want to blow up Japan.
Oh man.
Yeah. So
let's just move on.
Yeah. Not a nice person.
This event did generate a completely ridiculous marketing video of Bill Gates inside of Doom.
Oh yeah. So like wearing a black leather trench coat, and like
it's so we'll link the footage in the show notes. Like all the footage you can find out there of this is like so low res you can barely tell it's Bill Gates. Like you can't even really make out his face very well, but you can just barely see enough detail to get that. So yes, he's in a trench coat and he has a prop shotgun. Yeah. Underneath all of that, it looks like he literally just stepped out of his office. Like they didn't even bother with wardrobe other than throwing this coat on him. He's just wearing his plain old sweater vest and like dumb khakis.
Button down and V-neck sweater and Dockers. Yeah.
It's so bad.
I think like, okay. So the thing you have to remember about this is in 1995, Windows was important, but it wasn't like the only operating system you could run on a PC, right? The OS2 Warp was still a thing. Like it wasn't clear that Microsoft was going to become an unstoppable monopoly at this point. We were on the cusp of that. We were on the top of the slope about to roll downhill. But like, as somebody said in one of the articles about this, there were more computers running Doom at this point than Windows 95 when this event happened, right? Because Windows 95 was new. People were skeptical about it. Didn't run on a lot of computers. Like there were issues.
Yeah.
So him coming out in this wasn't ominous monopolist Bill Gates. It was hopeful monopolist Bill Gates, right?
It's maybe a distinction without a difference, but yes.
Yeah, so he comes out, he does this talk. At the end, it closes with, "Who do you want to execute today?"
Right.
But
in like a kind of like really creepy looking font.
It's like a bloody font. Yeah.
Because their tagline at the time was, "Where do you want to go today?" Right.
Yeah. And Bill Gates actually shoots an NPC in the game.
A Sarge or whatever type Doom enemy comes at him and he literally blows him away with a shotgun.
He's like, "Don't waste my time, Sarge." Bam.
It's so cheesy.
Yeah. It's very cheesy.
But he does say in there, he's like, "Oh yeah, at this event, we're going to show you 75 games running on Windows 95. Like it was kind of a lot. Like they were making
by the end of the year,
big push.
Yeah. I don't know. It's weird to look back on this because I remember reading about this in Boot and seeing coverage of this in some of the game blogs that I was reading at the time. Before we called them blogs, just to be clear, the idea that they got Doom running on Windows was novel, right? Because Doom didn't run on Windows.
Oh, do you mean Gabe Newell's Win Doom?
Look, we got to save something for the DirectX episode, okay? But yes, Gabe Newell's Win Doom.
He apparently, I don't know, where did you dig this up?
This is also in the PC Gamer article. He was the team lead inside Microsoft. Microsoft went to Carmack and id and was like, "Hey, we will port Doom to Windows. Just give us code and you keep all the rights. You can sell it for whatever you want. We don't care. We just want Doom running on Windows. We'll do all the work." So Carmack handed him the code and was like, go nuts. And that's and thus a young Gabe Newell got his first taste of game programming, I guess. I don't know what he was doing before that, but
tasted the forbidden fruit of successful video game development.
I don't understand why Bill Gates was wearing a black leather trench coat at that, because it was before the Matrix. Like, did they just need to give him a prop that made him look like a video game character? Is that it? Or was it like it was like Snow Crash?
Maybe Bill Gates is a secret trench coat connoisseur. Who knows?
I mean, the black leather trench coat had such a journey from like pre-Columbine 90s to post-Columbine 2000s, plus the Matrix in there at some point. Yeah. Anyway, okay.
Yes. Anyway, a couple other interesting factoids that we pulled here. I don't know where you got this one from. Apparently, id Software had a booth at Judgment Day that was designed by GWAR.
Yeah, they didn't know. Well, GWAR wasn't as big then as not that GWAR is like changing the world with their music at this point, but
don't you speak ill of GWAR.
GWAR was very small then. And so they asked id to do a booth and nobody at id knew how to do a booth. So the oral history is that they were just like, hey, let's get these GWAR guys, give them some money and get them to design the booth. So they made a 8-foot tall, they made a tunnel that you had to walk through to get into the booth, that the entrance was an 8-foot tall vulva with dildo teeth and a whole bunch of horrible, like it's a real fucking choice.
As we said, no footage of that in here, but you can definitely see plenty of goofy shit in this episode.
Look, I've heard that it's impossible to get video off of the internet. It is impossible to find videos or photographs of that booth at this point.
Yeah, it's lost to history.
I want to know what the Microsoft executive reaction at that time was when they walked up to this thing that they were spending millions of dollars on, and there's these assholes from Texas who made this horrifically offensive booth.
Yeah. I mean, that is an amazing example of like those guys were just a bunch of 20-something metalheads, nerds.
No, they're idiots. Why?
With too much money. But the with too much money is the operative part here, because they had capital to throw at stupid ideas like this, and they did so.
Well, and at the same time, like, why the fuck isn't somebody, one of the grown-ups in the room saying, hey, look, man, you can't do this. This isn't okay.
I think it's pretty clear that there were no grown-ups.
I mean, fair. I mean, look, yes, 80s computer sales guys, it turns out we're not thinking about how to make the market. Anyway, whatever. Yeah. It's bad.
The other interesting thing I pulled out of this that I had no idea about is that Sony apparently ported some early PlayStation games to Windows 95, and they had
like Twisted Metal.
Yes, like Twisted Metal and Warhawk are shown running on Windows 95 here. Those are PlayStation launch games.
Yep.
Also, this was, I think,
did they ever come out?
No, that's what I'm getting to. Let me check real quick. I think this was before the PlayStation launched in America. Like shortly before, like very shortly. Like,
because it launched in late 95, right?
It was 95. I want to say it might have been September. I could look real quick if we care. But the interesting. So it came out in December 94 in Japan. I think it was it was right around here, September, I believe. Anyway,
that's interesting.
So the Twisted Metal port did come out only in Japan for Windows 95. So like that is out there because it was released, but only in Japanese.
Wow.
The Warhawk port was just straight canceled. So it never saw the light of day. I couldn't find, I don't think it ever leaked or anything like that, but it's kind of wild to think back then, like that's awfully early for especially like a Japanese company to be porting their games to PC, because like, it happened a little bit over the years, like Final Fantasy VII and a few others made it to PC after that, but it was not a big thing. So like this is like an interesting little lost to history thing.
Well, I have to imagine that Microsoft made the same offer, right, to a bunch of people. They were like, hey, we would like to bring, I'm sure they called Nintendo, like, we would like to bring Super Mario World to Windows. And, the same deal that id famously, when they ported Super Mario Brothers 3 to the PC.
Right.
But yeah, I feel like that is those are the people that said yes. It's interesting that they were working with Sega at that point too, because like they ended up having a pretty good collaboration with Sega, because the Dreamcast ran WinCE or something, right?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. So anyway, this event went notoriously over budget. Like it was an enormous boondoggle. Eventually, it took a few years after this, I believe, but eventually Alex St. John was sacked from Microsoft for being an asshole. This was the beginning of DirectX on Windows. Like this is the consumer kickoff of the idea that you could play games on your Windows. Because prior to that, Windows 3.1 games were incredibly limited. I want to say like Myst ran on Windows 3.1.
Yeah, like a lot of the early Sierra games did. I mean, but it was very much limited to like point and click, like kind of multimedia experiences, I would say, like things that were made in HyperCard and that sort of thing, like stuff with video and like still graphics, but action games were absolutely not a thing in Windows at that point.
Nothing that required any kind of frame rate or Twitch graphics or Twitch reactions or anything like that. So it was a big deal, and it was interesting to see their presentation of it. I wonder how much of the footage that they got was completely unusable for this event because of apparently there was like blood reading about it now, it feels really icky in a way that I haven't experienced it at an event in a long time. So what's up next? Well, let's see. There was a shocking number of FMV games on this one.
Yeah. This also made me remember that Computer Chronicles really just whips through the in-studio demos. Like Stewart just does not stop. Like he kind of like, I love the guy. He's a good host. He kind of talks over the guests a lot. Like he really just sort of like bulldozers in with his next question before they can even finish making their point. But
there was a literal timer on the wall behind the guests so you could see how long the segments were going.
That's fair. Yeah. Like, yes, I mean, these are tight 28-minute I
don't think these were edited. I don't think the studio segments were edited
because they do. What were the two they did back to back? They did Journeyman Project 2 and then MechWarrior 2 back to back. And like literally the reps for both games were sitting like right next to each other. And he literally just stood up from one demo and walked over to the other table and started the next one. Like no editing at all. And like in that sense, like knowing how hard it is to keep a live show going and like stay on point and like not trip over your words and stuff. Like he's pretty professional in that sense.
Well, he did a piece to the camera as he's walking over. Right. Maybe not on this episode, but on some of them he definitely did. So
he's a pro for sure.
Yeah, it was fun to see Phantasmagoria because I haven't looked at that game in like, I don't know, 20 years probably.
So I never played it despite being a huge Sierra fan. I mean, I kind of fell off. I was like, like Doom and Quake and stuff were happening at this point. I was like, I could just blow things up instead of pointing and clicking. But anyway, I didn't realize Phantasmagoria was as much of a point and click as it was. I thought it was a lot more FMV based, which I'm sure they use for cutscenes, but like you're still clicking a character around a background and picking up objects and doing puzzle stuff. Like I didn't realize it was still like kind of one of those.
Well, it was superimposed. Like I think they green screened the character action bits and then superimposed them on the backgrounds that were sometimes FMV and sometimes 3D and sometimes painted or whatever. Right. It's funny. This is when I was like, this was the summer that I made a lot of money installing Windows 95 and running networks for people. So I had cash to spend on games and was going to EB and buying games when I wasn't working all the time. And a 7-disc FMV adventure game, like this was very much in the Tex Murphy kind of mold, right? Like, hey, here's some terrible 3D backgrounds of things that we're going to put live characters on top of Mortal Kombat style. I can't imagine what it was like recording these games. Like, and it was funny because so Roberta Williams did the presentation and she got more time than anybody. She got more time than I think I've ever seen on a demo on this show.
I mean, rightfully so.
Well, I mean, fair. Yeah. But like I never realized some stuff. She talked about like the end loop. So the end sequence was really hard in this game and it was complete trial and error. And you had 10 seconds to make each choice. And it was like a series of 10-second choices. And I guess the 10-second choices were because that meant they only had to record 10 seconds of video for the actress who played the hero in the game. But it was a game about a woman whose husband, like, it was basically The Shining, but played from the wife's perspective instead of from the husband's perspective.
Right. The big spooky mansion or hotel or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Or they bought a house and it's haunted, magicians, cults, whatever, yada, yada. It was a good game. I enjoyed that game a lot.
Yeah. It's neat to see that being presented in context. Also, she mentioned something very offhandedly toward the end that read as very grim to me in retrospect.
Because this was the last thing she worked on, wasn't it?
I think that's
maybe she did Phantasmagoria 2.
So yeah, this would have been pretty close to the point where they sold and everything. But like knowing how Sierra ended up, like she mentions offhandedly, she was like, "Oh yeah, for my next game, I would love to make a fully 3D adventure game with a real 3D world." And like knowing A, what happened to Sierra, B, what happened to King's Quest after Sierra kind of got folded into shittier companies. And like, remember I never played Mask of Eternity, but it's the last King's Quest game and has an awful reputation.
Yeah, I never played any of those.
It is a fully 3D King's Quest that is not looked on kindly, and like also their company kind of imploded in the process.
I think the world would have been better if they'd kept making games longer.
Yeah, it's a real shame looking back on all that stuff.
They also talked about In the First Degree, which I had never heard of before. It was a Broderbund game. There was the Broderbund game follow up to Myst.
Yeah, it's like courtroom drama as the sequel, not sequel, but the next game from the Myst publisher.
Did it ever actually come out?
I assume so. I've never heard of it. I
feel like you guys would have had FMV. Here we go. In the First Degree 1995 adventure game. Yeah, it came out. You can download it from Abandonware things. It's 1,000. It's almost a gig.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's like
must have been 2 discs.
Yeah. That demo was replete with references to the O.J. Simpson trial from Stewart, of course.
Look, Brad, they started working on it 2 years before the events of the O.J. trial.
The developer really wanted you to know that.
Yeah.
We had like a good 2-year head start on that trial, just so you know. Journeyman Project 2 that we mentioned was there.
This was another banger. Did you play this?
No, I never played either of those.
Oh, you got to trade. So like their solution to, hey, the characters can't acknowledge, the other human characters can't acknowledge you whatsoever.
Because you're a time traveler.
Yeah, I'm a time traveler. Anybody who sees me has to die. So, but also you couldn't kill them because they didn't want to have they wanted it to not be a violent game. So it was always like an arrow would fly in from off screen when somebody spotted you, or they'd get whapped on the head by a falling brick in an earthquake. Or
that's just causality, you know?
Yeah.
Things have to work out.
It's the final destination of video games. Like the moment a human shows up and sees you, you go. These were like Myst style, so you'd like 90-degree turns, navigating through the environment. Most of them were kind of bad 3D renders that they did. Video, they made video, like QuickTime video pipes through.
Do you know why the viewport in this game is so small? Because the actual thing you can, like the action that you can see is like maybe a fifth of the screen at most.
Well, these ran in DOS, so there were no video drivers. So you had to, like, this was what you could run. This was the resolution that you could play video at off of a CD-ROM.
Sure.
Yeah, because remember they were dealing with like some of these would require 2x CD-ROMs probably. So you'd get like 300 kilobits per second was your video bit rate, maximum video bit rate.
Sure.
Yeah, it was real muddy.
Yeah.
I want to see. I don't know if you've been paying attention to this, but somebody is using machine learning upsampling on like the old Tex Murphy adventures.
Oh yeah, that stuff's everywhere. Like I found a YouTube channel that is upsampling all the FMV from Wing Commander 3.
Oh my god,
with AI.
Oh my god,
it's
I bet the Kilrathi look really bad.
It is of mixed success, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that AI video upsampling is going to get good enough that at some point we will just have like pristine HD video of everything from that era, or is it never going to quite? I don't know.
I think the sub standard def TV stuff is going to be. I think standard def TV resolutions and lower are going to be hard. I think when you have 1,000, when you have the 5 million pixel or however many million pixels are in HD 1080p stuff, I feel like that era is going to be easily upsampled to whatever.
For sure. Yeah. I've tried to dabble a little bit with that stuff with some of the open source tools that are out there. I've tried feeding some old home movies that were recorded on crappy old VHS tapes and then digitized. So like
it's hard.
It is tough to get anything usable out of that at all.
Yeah.
And especially because it's not just the tools. It's also like you have to go and look through data sets and decide like, okay, I'm going to use this data set that was trained on this many hours of footage by this person, and it's mostly anime. No, I don't want that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like there's multiple components. It's not just feed this into a command line tool and it just works.
Yeah, it's still early enough that there is a real nuance and skill to doing that stuff, and there are no one-shot tools.
Yeah.
MechWarrior 2?
MechWarrior 2.
Hold on. Journeyman Project 2 was a 40-hour FMV game.
Yeah, that's what he said. Like, it'll take you 40 to 50 hours to finish. It's like
that's insane. Sorry. MechWarrior 2.
MechWarrior 2, I would happily play for 40 to 50 hours.
Did you actually play MechWarrior 2?
Dude, hell yeah. Like, I bought it when it came out. Like, I have a deep fondness for MechWarrior 2.
Oh, I got it with a Rage 2 card, I think.
Okay. Yeah, you wrote here in the notes that it might be running on a Rage 2 card. I'm pretty sure this was software because they ran down the specs of the machine that this was running on pretty extensively and didn't mention anything about a card.
Look, I'm going to tell you from personal experience, Stewart Cheifet has always been a little skeptical about 3D accelerators.
I could see that. I definitely played the software version. This was MechWarrior 2 was in that weird era, that weird in between where games were starting to run at Super VGA, so 640 by 480, but before the cards were really out and available. This was before 3D effects.
Yeah.
So there was this awful like year, 18 months where it was like Wing Commander 3 and this and some of those Tex Murphy games. Like running at that resolution without acceleration was very difficult.
Yeah.
Like you were talking 5 to 15 frames a second, depending on like the speed of your CPU.
Yeah, this MechWarrior 2 demo looked like it was running at most at about 15 frames a second.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the secret of those early pre-3DFX 3D accelerators is they didn't really accelerate that much 3D. They were just doing texture sampling. So like the Rage 2s and the S3 Verges and all that were 3D. You could get a 3D accelerated version of MechWarrior 2 for those, but they didn't really accelerate anything.
Yeah. This was, I don't know. He asked what the minimum hardware was, which the guy from Activision also, this was like pre-shitty Activision, which is always weird.
I don't know. I'd say Activision was probably still shitty back then. Just nobody talked about it.
I don't know. Like not Bobby Kotick shitty.
Well, yeah. I would assume that every game studio was shitty in many of the same ways that Activision has been shitty to women. Mostly.
Yeah, for sure. But anyway, he said 486 DX66 was like the minimum, which come on. You're not going to play MechWarrior 2 on that. Come on. Well,
but then he follows it up with, but it always plays better on a Pentium.
Yeah, and also I think it was a Pentium 133 that were running it on there. Anyway, MechWarrior 2 rules. Like it is. I haven't played it in a very long time, to be fair.
I was more of a heavy gear guy. But it ruled. That was later, though, I think.
In the day. Also an all-time soundtrack. Which, if you happen to have your CD, as I do, is Red Book Audio, and you can rip and put in your library.
They had an online gaming segment, which was always funny at this time, because like this was when, prior to Windows 95, Windows didn't have a TCP/IP stack built in,
right?
So it was a real process to get online.
Yeah. So they highlighted Imagination with capital N, which was Sierra's online gaming network. I think it started out as 10 TEN, the entertainment network.
It became that after this.
Oh, it was 10 after Imagination?
Yeah, it was 10 and 1 were the other one, WON.
Okay. So I wonder.
You could play Spades there for years.
Yes. A lot of card games.
Yeah.
Here. It's so quaint. Like they talk to like a working mother who is big on Imagination, and like it's so quaint because they go through like the little avatar creation process where you make kind of a little cartoony pixelated. You could have a person that looked like anything you wanted as long as they were white. And she's like, oh, you meet people from all over the country and get to know them, and you're playing cards, and it's nice or whatever. And it's just the whole thing is just so innocent and quaint compared to what online interaction has become.
Well, and also she's like, sometimes I get really into it and stay up until 2 a.m. playing Spades or Hearts. Hearts was the thing we were really into, but now it's blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's funny. I
wonder, you actually made me wonder if you got, so if I remember, I want to say they were putting like Imagination installers in magazines and stuff because like the subscription fee is how they made the money. Like it was
like $5 a month or $10 a month.
They wanted to America Online, the software out there to everyone, but it makes me wonder because this was like pre-ubiquitous internet access. Like did that installer have its own TCP/IP stack that it would set up for you? Or
I think you dialed in directly to their network.
Totally right. You're totally right. That was not over the internet. That was you were dialing directly into phone banks that they had set up, right?
So eventually it became an internet thing.
Yeah.
Like 10 and 1 and all that is like, because remember 10 is how you connected to Half-Life multiplayer for a long time, as I recall.
Was it?
I think so.
Oh, that's wild. I mean, yeah, Sierra was the publisher of Half-Life.
It was weird. This would have been around the same time that like Dwango was how you played Doom with a modem, right? It's a different time for online games. I remember, it's funny, my daughter plays Roblox and just plays with random people around the world on the day-to-day, and I'm in awe/jealousy because like growing up and living in the country where I did, if I wanted to play computer games or Nintendo games with somebody else, I had to like have a sleepover basically.
Yeah. I tend to think like, I'm not sure how to articulate this. I've thought this over for a while. Like some of the limitations you grow up with in that kind of context are, I mean, they're so intrinsic to your experience that like I don't necessarily like envy kids who have way more options for online stuff or whatever these days, because it's like, I don't know. Like I said, I don't quite know how to put this into words, but like having very limited access to stuff like that is still part of what kind of formed my experience, you know, and like I value that as much as if it had been better.
Well, yeah, like having somebody to play chess. Like my grandmother came over every Sunday and we played chess because she liked to play chess and she was the only person in the family who liked to play chess. And like, had I had access to an infinite number of chess players around my skill level or just slightly above my skill level at any given moment, probably wouldn't have cherished that time. We wouldn't have spent hours around the chessboard talking about like what it was like to be her and what it was like to be me and stuff like that. So you are absolutely correct. But also, man, it would have been cool to be able to play Doom with a bunch of people when I was a freshman in college.
Oh, sure.
Anyway. Yeah. They also talked about MUDs. I don't know. Did you ever do MUDs? You were an IRC guy.
Yeah, but that was later. I think MUDs had really fallen out of favor by then. It was kind of late 90s when I got on IRC. I mean, so this segment is more about like a website that they found that aggregates MUDs as opposed to really talking much about playing MUDs themselves. Like even here, the MUDs feel a little bit anachronistic because they're showing all these like CD-ROM multimedia games and MechWarrior and like the PlayStation. And then here is this little game you play in a terminal window over Telnet.
Well, so they did a bad job describing, because the person who introduced me to MUDs were like, yeah, it's like a text adventure that you play with multiple people.
Yeah,
I was like, oh,
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm in for this. The thing, having played a fair number of MUDs when I was in college in like 97, 98, anytime your MUD was mentioned in any kind of mainstream media context, it basically ruined it for like at least a month, because you'd have like the endless summer effect inside that MUD, because a bunch of new people would come in and they'd crap up the noob areas. Everybody would have to vacate. The old timers would all pick a room someplace far away to come do the social stuff. And then, people would make their way in eventually.
Do you think there are a lot of MUDs running these days?
There are a ton of MUDs, because running a MUD, like I can run a MUD that will hold a million people on a Pi right now.
Man.
Yeah. We should. Hey, Brad,
what if we got really into MUDs?
We should have a tech pod MUD.
We should absolutely do that. I'm searching for MUDs is pretty tough these days. Let's see.
You just get a lot of stories about wet dirt.
If I search for MUD game, perhaps.
What about multi-user dungeon?
Like I kind of now I want to know. I less now want to know about MUDs that are running that I can play, and more about like MUD frameworks that I can host myself. Like what is the popular MUD engine?
So like Lambda Moo, the Moo is probably the thing you want to do because it's extensible.
Okay.
It's like user extensible. So if you give users the right permissions, then they can write scripts that add on to you can add like connections to the existing rooms and stuff like that.
An online community of the variety called it. What is there a distinction between Moo and MUD? Yeah.
I don't remember what it is though.
Apparently a Moo is a type of MUD.
Yes. It's a subset.
What is this? A nested acronym?
MUD object oriented or something?
Exactly,
I don't know.
Yes. MUD is a multi-user dungeon, and a Moo is a MUD, object oriented.
Yeah. So you could write code that references other code, I guess, in the Moo. I can't remember.
Wow.
And it's all like pre-JavaScript stuff even. So I don't even know what kind of scripting you use. It's probably some weird bespoke language that's only used for MUDs.
Wait, can you? Oh, wow. Lambda Moo came out of Xerox PARC.
Yeah. Lambda Moo. I played on Lambda Moo for a long time. Because you could build your own rooms, and then you had to convince somebody to hook your room into their room. So like, because people own permissions over their rooms, over the stuff that they created. So like the closer you could get to the root, to the starting room, the better your room was, and the more likely people were to actually see it.
Huh.
But like you would say, hey, you own this room. Will you like let me put a portal on grabbing a candlestick in this room or whatever? And you'd get magically ported away to your part of the dungeon. And then you could build your own adventure from there. It was really fun. Okay.
I found it.
Yeah.
I found the SourceForge page for Lambda Moo with a CVS repository.
Oh, perfect.
That's how old this thing is. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I would have played Lambda Moo in like 96, probably 97.
This repository for this server was last modified in the year 2000.
That seems right.
Maybe somebody is now hosting it on GitHub. I don't know.
I bet somebody has ported it to Python at this point.
Probably
would be my guess.
I'm sure there are more modern ways to get something like this up and running.
Yeah.
I wish I had more time to dabble with something like this. This sounds awesome.
Look, this should be a Nextlander. Brad Makes a Mud is a perfect Nextlander series.
Do people really want to watch a stream of a giant terminal window?
I think they would watch that and you would get good ideas and they would help you with the code.
Man.
Anyway.
Fun. Yeah.
There were news hits.
Yeah.
There's always news hits at the end of a Computer Chronicles.
Yeah. The Pentium Pro was being rolled out, which I don't know how I had kind of forgotten that the Pentium Pro existed.
So it was because it was a bad product. They couldn't make enough of them because they bonded the L2. So the Pentium Pro was a Pentium 2, or what would have become the Pentium 2, with a bonded L2 cache that ran at the full CPU clock speed. So you could get like a 200 megahertz L2 cache, which was very important for performance back then.
And to be clear, this was the successor architecture to the Pentium, right?
Yes.
Okay. It's the P6. That's why I guess I had kind of forgotten about the Pentium Pro branding, but it was known as the P6 internally.
Well, yeah, because the Pentium was the
P5.
The Pentium was a 586 theoretically. Right. This would have been a 686.
Right. But like you said, this sort of was an offshoot that then kind of they'd steered back onto track as the Pentium 2.
Well, the problem was they didn't build this in such a way that they could test the CPU and the L2 cache independently to see if they worked. So as I recall, they had to bind them to each other permanently before they could find out if there was a problem with either one. And as a result, their yields were abysmal on them. And in finding out that one part had died, they ruined the other good part. So like it was like a very inefficient way to make a CPU. And as a result, they came up with the P2 slot design, which had the CPU and the L2 cache on this card that slotted into the motherboard instead of using a socket. Also worth mentioning, part of this was to move everybody off of socket 7 so that the competitive CPUs that were socket 7 compatible, which was an open socket standard that was available to a bunch of manufacturers, including like AMD and Cyrix. Intel wanted to get everybody onto their own proprietary bullshit so that you couldn't just buy another CPU that was better than the one you had and put it in your computer.
And that's how your CPU became a cartridge.
Yeah, exactly. Worth mentioning, the Pentium 2 slot design, the L2 speed was half speed, so it ran at one half the CPU speed of the processor.
Is that because it was obviously going over a much slower interconnect than being on the die?
Yeah, but it was they kind of accounted for that by doing a bigger L2 cache because it was cheap to put on the half speed stuff. The interesting thing here is that this is what gave rise to the Celeron. So the Celeron was a slot design originally, but there was no external L2 cache. They just put a very small amount of internal full speed L2 cache, which it turned out for most workloads at the time was totally fine. Mm-hmm. And completely counterbalanced by the fact that you could overclock them by like 1.5 times.
Yes, so we have waxed nostalgic about the Celeron 300A on numerous occasions.
Love that Celeron 300A. So yeah, that was it was interesting they talked about that because I had, as you said, completely forgotten that the Pentium Pro existed. And now thinking back on it, the fact that they called it the Pentium Pro makes me think, oh, Intel totally knew that this wasn't going to be a scalable thing, but they wanted to get something out in the market. So they gave it this weird name, knowing that the Pentium 2 would be the real product, and it was just lagging behind by 6 months or a year.
Yeah, I'm like risking getting out of my depth here, but looking at the Wikipedia page for the P6, I feel like I remember this in the press at the time. This looks like this was the start of Intel steering in a more RISC-like direction for the internal function of this thing.
Yeah.
P6 processors dynamically translate IA32 instructions into sequences of buffered RISC-like micro-operations. Like you see that a lot now these days of people saying like, my sense, again, I super am a layman when it comes to CPU design, but like you see a lot of people these days saying like terms like RISC and CISC are kind of outdated because there's so much overlap and kind of interoperation, or like in terms of design philosophy between the two, that like those distinctions aren't really all that relevant anymore.
Here's the secret. They never were that relevant. It didn't matter because you ran the software that was compiled for the system you had.
But they did work differently. At one point, I think they had very different like kind of pipeline philosophies. But anyway,
but everything's been hybridized to the point. And
that's what I mean.
The thing to remember is the P Pro, the P2, and P3 were all basically the same architecture. The P4 was the one that got super risky because they were like, look, we're going to make a bunch of these deep, long risk pipelines that we can clock it up because numbers matter. So we're going to build something we can clock up to 4 gigahertz, and whether the process can handle it or not, we'll design the architecture around getting big numbers over performance. So anyway, they talked about Spark Ultra, which was an interest. Like, I don't have any I feel like those were the workstations we used in CS 100, but maybe not.
Yeah. I didn't look up too much about this. I gather that the Ultra was just sort of kind of next generation Spark.
That was my recollection, but ultimately it didn't matter
in terms of Spark. The success of the platform. You mean?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I mean, look, this is, like I said, in a different universe, we're all running Spark terminals now, right?
Yeah, like dumb pizza box smart terminals or Spark terminals that dial into. Yeah. I just read last night that Illumos has actually this is not recent. I guess this was sometime in the last year that Illumos dropped Spark support.
Wow.
Illumos is what's the open source fork of Solaris from before Oracle bought Sun and kind of did what they did to all of Sun. But essentially the open source successor to the OS that ran on Sparks has now dropped support for Spark processors. So like that's kind of end of an era. I think Linux still builds against Spark, I believe, from what I could find. Like I just find that stuff. I know we've talked about like DEC alphas and old MIPS CPUs and stuff. I find all that big iron CPU stuff from back then fascinating, even though it's all kind of in the rearview mirror at this point. But like, especially watching Linux slowly deprecate support for stuff like that.
I had a DEC alpha machine that I had to maintain for a little bit, and it was at the time I was like, this is the hottest machine I've ever had to deal with because that thing got so hot.
Oh, sure.
And it's probably like a $15 Cooler Master cooler now. You know what I mean? Anyway. There was also a news segment that was like, it's funny because sometimes they would pull these things that were clearly like home camera, or they'd send somebody to record a press conference and there'd be some computer executive standing up there in a bad sport coat, holding a microphone at about his waist level, kind of
I noticed his bad microphone discipline.
Oh yeah. And like, you think about the difference between that, like a guy in a conference room at like a random office park in Menlo Park somewhere, and Apple building a 500-seat theater to roll out iPhones, and think about the 25 years and the difference in that.
I mean, he's literally just standing in a room with people around him. Like there's no stage, there's no nothing. He's literally just standing up. Other people are just kind of milling around. Like there's zero pomp to the whole thing.
I assume that there's a coffee urn just out of shot on the right or the left from him. Right. And like, he doesn't even seem excited about the product. Like he's clearly he's not been media trained at all. Right. But he described what was on their website about medical stuff as content, which would have been an early, oh yeah, we're putting content on the web.
I don't like it.
Ugh.
Not a fan. Also, I will say all the random shots of Netscape in this thing made me really nostalgic.
Oh yeah.
I guess, whatever. Netscape was the browser back then, right?
Yeah. This was, like I said, before the monopoly, right?
Yeah.
It was
everybody was using
OSR2.
Netscape.
But a glint on Microsoft's I feel like you got Internet Explorer with the Plus pack, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I was not on the internet at this time. This was a little before we got internet. I think like a year after this or something.
No, but I'd been on the internet for probably 2 years at this point.
But I was
shell stuff.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
I was a staunch Netscape user for as long as Netscape was around.
Yeah, it's this we've talked about this before, but Windows 95 is when I got a non-shell account to the internet around the time Windows 95 came out, and it turns out I'd probably had access to it for a long time. I just didn't know how to turn it on.
Actually, hang on. I'm really reaching here. Was Netscape Navigator 3.0 like a big disaster? I'm trying to.
2.0 was the one that was the popular one.
2.0 was the one. Like 2.0 was the bedrock, super solid. Like that's the go-to browser. I feel like I remember 3 coming out and being kind of a mess.
I don't think 3 was bad. I think IE was just shipped with the computer and you didn't have to download anything to use. Like this, remember, this was at a time when the difference between 256 kilobytes and 756 kilobytes was substantial in terms of download time, right?
Yes.
Like If you had to download 2 megabytes, you were going to take an hour and a half or 2 hours to do that. It's a weird time.
Yes. Speaking of weird time, there's like a little addendum at the end of this thing. I don't know. I don't even know if this segment had a name or whatever, but yes, all of a sudden, like, here is Stewart with a PlayStation and a Saturn in front of him.
Brad, did you know that the kids love Panzer Dragoon?
Do they? He was like, here's the Sega Saturn with a great title, Panzer Dragoon. Like, I didn't even get the sense that he had played Panzer Dragoon at this point.
I don't. So as somebody who experienced a Saturn entirely through marketing material, I really was interested in Panzer Dragoon. Yeah. But I didn't know anybody who had a Saturn, and as a result, never played Panzer Dragoon until very recently.
Oh, you know what? You might be right about. So the PlayStation, I just finally looked the date up. 9th of September, 95. So like days after this episode aired is when the PlayStation officially came out in the US. So like, unless that was an import Japanese one, he very likely got that from Sony directly. If I had to guess.
My guess is that was hot, and the producer was like, we gotta get some console stuff in here for the kids. We'll put it at the very end so they watch the whole rest of the show.
We got to reach that public television viewing child audience out there.
Exactly. I mean, look, children love public television, Brad. But this show was always on like Saturday morning at like 9 o'clock. So it was counter-programmed against cartoons here. At least.
You might catch, a couple of. At one point, he was like, if you're trying to decide between these consoles, the hardware seems about the same on both sides. I forget how he put it, but like, no, Stewart, no.
Look, the Sega Saturn had a proud and powerful lineage in history. It was basically a 32X jammed into the anyway.
It was two 32Xs taped together with a CD-ROM.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Some great 2D games on there.
What a burn!
And also that's where his dad energy really came in this episode because he's like. It's like, oh, they seem about comparable. The bigger question you might be asking is, if you have a PC, do you need a video game player at all? And then he goes into the whole spiel of like, oh, you buy your computer game, you don't have enough memory, you don't have enough video, you don't have enough hard drive. And then he's like, these game machines are expensive, but just getting the game and putting it in and playing is worth a lot. Like extremely 90s dad kind of stuff.
Look, if your kids want them video games and you don't want to be hassled, here you go. Get yourself a Saturn.
Yeah.
I have to say I do remember when like the N64 came out later the next year, I guess.
Yeah, that was about a year after this.
I was like, oh man, I can just play games and I don't have to make a boot disc for every game. That's cool.
Fair.
Yeah.
It's a valid point.
Yeah, things are a little bit better these days. But I think that's the end of the episode. Yeah. And that's probably the end of our episode too. As always, this is the part of the show where we remind you that Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod is a 100% listener supported show. So thank you, listeners.
I can verify that is the case. Also, I can say thank you, listeners.
Thank you, listeners. Patreon is taking a really long time to load right now. So
wait, do I have to fill? I don't have a title for this episode. I've got a super risky is the best thing I've come up with so far. And we're really running out of time to generate something better. It's not terrible.
You want me to say something bad?
No, yes. Say something. Now's your chance. Say something controversial. Is this your network moment? Just going to go
I'm mad as hell.
Just go throw the window open
today. And honestly, I wish people would stop tweeting at me. That's my please stop tweeting at me.
I don't think that's
please.
That's not going to work.
People. No. Okay. But yeah, we appreciate the support from all of our patrons. And if you would like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/techpod. Again, that's patreon.com/techpod, where you can pay for as little as $2 a month. You can get access to the fabulous TechPod Discord, which is filled with like 3,000 beautiful nerds who I guarantee you share some interests with you, no matter how esoteric your interests are.
Yeah.
We also need to thank our executive producer tier patrons, including Paddle Creek Games, makers of Fractured Veil, Andrew Slosky, Bunny Thorpe Octocrimes, Wedge. Brad shook his head on that one. Not Wedge, the Bunny Thorpe Octocrimes.
No, it's amusing.
It's good.
You never know what you're going to get.
No, it's always a surprise, and it's always hard to say. So I like both of those things. Jacob Chappell. Thank you, Jacob. Joel Krauska, 802.11 B Twinkie. That one's pretty good too.
Not bad.
David Allen and James Kamek, thank you all so much.
How about 802.11t?
Oh,
no.
I'm more of that 802.11ax life now.
Yeah, that's fair.
We, as always, will be back next week with another episode of the Tech Pod. In the meantime, you should go listen to the last episode of the Foss Pod. Yeah. It was very good.
Yeah, we talked to Brian Chris Brown of Project North Star, which was a fascinating conversation. I didn't expect it to go in some of the directions it went in.
Somebody pointed this out after the episode was posted, but the fact that we had an interview with Chris Brown, a guy named Chris Brown, the week after the show, the incident is a weird coincidence and was completely accidental.
Yeah.
I don't think we knew his middle name was Chris before we did the show. But anyway.
Yeah. Project North Star it's an open source augmented reality headset
that you can build yourself, theoretically.
Yes.
It was a fun talk.
Yeah. Some interesting stuff in there for sure.
Yeah. And we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good week.